Morning. Good morning, Executive Director and staff of CRFM, representatives of the fisheries community from across CARICOM and the Caribbean, and all guests online. We have a very I see we have a very full house, and it's getting fuller by the minute. So we'll get to a quick start. My pleasant task this morning is to moderate this panel which is the fourth of a webinar series convened by CRFM as we mark the 20th anniversary of CRFM. And since I'm from CARICOM, I should also mention that we're back in 50 years of the Caribbean community as well. We have our fourth of our webinar series dealing with strategies for tackling abandoned, lost, or discarded fishing gear, ALDFG, in the Caribbean, stopping the silent killer lurking in Caribbean waters. Actionable solutions to the growing ghost gear problem. As many of us would know, but for those of us who may not be familiar with the term, the issue of ghost fishing occurs when abandoned, lost, or discarded fishing gear, or ghost gear, threatens fishing populations and other marine life, thereby threatening the welfare of Caribbean communities, especially those dependent on fishing and coastal resources. It's also can place a significant threat on our marine life. Our webinar today will examine, will first of all provide an overview of the status of ALDFG efforts at the national, regional, and international levels, and present options for the way forward for CARICOM. So the purpose of the webinar, or the Caribbean purpose of the webinar, is on the screen. We will also be having a very exciting event where we'll be signing MOU with the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, and I'm sure the director will say more about that when the time comes. But I don't want to spend too much time talking. I will go straight to introducing our panel, because I know we have a very well-informed, a very knowledgeable panel, and I want to introduce them to you. So we will start with the panel discussion, of course, and then we will go on to the signing of the MOU between CRFM and GGGI, and then we will have the moderated discussion. So let me move into introducing our panel, and we start with first of all, Mr. Milton Haughton, who is no stranger to many of us. He is the Executive Director of CRFM, a graduate of University of the West Indies, University of Buckingham, the London Metropolitan University, and the University of Law in London, holding postgraduate qualifications in fisheries, general management, and law, and has over 43 years of work experience in fisheries in the Caribbean. He has served CRFM since its inception in 2003 and has brought to CRFM and to CARICOM in general a wealth of experience in fisheries, aquaculture development, governance, coastal and marine resource conservation and management, public administration, project management, and law. So that Milton will be our first speaker. He will be followed by Mr. Joel Baziuk, who is the Associate Director with the Global Ghost Gear Initiative. He is a National Geographic Explorer in conjunction with a GGGI project in the Mayak Archipelago in Myanmar, and has participated in numerous technical working groups concerning lost and abandoned fishing gear. He previously worked for 20 years in the Canadian fishing industry, 13 of which were as operations supervisor for the Stuyvesant Harbor Authority, Canada's largest commercial fishing harbor. During his time at the harbor, he started an end-of-life net recycling program to find a sustainable way to dispose of end-of-life fishing nets. So that will be our second speaker. The third speaker, of course, is also no stranger to those of us in the Caribbean community, Dr. Tricia Lovell. Let me also add my congratulations to our newly minted PhD. She holds she holds a Master's of Marine Management from Dalhousie and has just completed her PhD in Maritime Affairs at the Maritime University. Her research is on understanding the challenges of ALDFG governance in Eastern Caribbean small-scale fisheries. She has over 20 years experience in fisheries management and most recently served as the Deputy Chief Fisheries Officer in Antigua and Barbuda before going on leave for her PhD studies. In 2021, Tricia was featured by the Commonwealth Blue Economy, where she shared her journey on becoming a leader in fisheries management in Antigua and Barbuda. And last but by no means least, we have Dr. Daana Kanhai of the University of the West Indies, the Department of Life Sciences, University of the West Indies in Augustine campus. Dr. Kanhai's multidisciplinary research is on understanding human impact of species, communities, and ecosystems. Her latest research focused on the human dimension of plastic pollution in Trinidad and Tobago and ALDFG in Trinidad and Tobago. At UWI, she teaches undergraduate courses focused on coastal and marine ecosystems, science communication, and environmental impact assessments, and has recently published on the issue of marine debris and plastic pollution in the Caribbean large marine ecosystem. So as I said, colleagues, we have a very knowledgeable and excellent panel. We have a number of resources which can be found on the website associated with the webinar that you can peruse at your leisure. And at this stage, what I will do is introduce our first speaker, who I mentioned is the Executive Director of CRFM, Mr. Haughton, to do his presentation, which is an introduction on ALDFG in the Caribbean and the CRFM's efforts to address the problem.
Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, Madam Chair, and pleasant good morning to the distinguished panelists also. So my presentation this morning is focused on introducing the idea of abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear in the Caribbean and our efforts at the regional level to deal with the problem. So very briefly, part of the objective of the CRFM is effective management and sustainable development of the marine living resources available in our member states. And among the key principles that guide our action are maintaining biodiversity in the marine environment, managing fishing capacity and fishing practices in order to facilitate sustainable fisheries, and promoting responsible fisheries practice generally. So, just by way of context, the marine environment provides a multitude of goods and services that are critical, vital for our socioeconomic development. And the fisheries are very, very important industries in the region. It's a valuable source of protein and micronutrients for people. It's very important for employment, livelihoods, foreign currency earnings, etc. However, our fisheries are under serious threats. Not only the fisheries, but the marine environment generally is going under a lot of stress at this time from a number of sources: habitat degradation, pollution, climate change, acidification, irresponsible fishing, IUU fishing, and also fishing by derelict fishing gears, or ghost fishing, as we like to call it. So sustainable management and conservation, as well as protection of our fisheries and marine biodiversity and their ecosystems, are extremely important priorities for the region. So given the challenges we face with some of our fisheries, particularly our coastal resources, for example, queen conch, spiny lobsters, the reef fishes, many of these are fully developed or in some cases overexploited in certain areas. And it is against this background that in recent years, we have become increasingly concerned about the problem of ghost fishing. And I use the term ghost fishing, but it's the same, referring to abandoned, lost, and otherwise discarded fishing gear. So we have recognized the need, urgent need, to begin to address this. Ghost fishing is basically caused by derelict fishing gear, which are abandoned, lost, or discarded at sea. And it is a serious problem throughout the region. Even though we don't understand the full extent, the work that has been done show that it is a significant problem that we must deal with. Now, from as early as 2014, through the CARICOM project, we started addressing ghost fishing in some ways. There was work done, tangible work done on the ground in Antigua and Barbuda to address the problem. In 2018, we started engaging with GGGI. They participated in a few of our forum meeting where, we had discussions on the matter. In 2018, the ministers issued a policy statement at the conclusion of the CARICOM project. And in the policy statement, they specifically identify the issue of ghost fishing and agreed that urgent attention should be given to action to advance co-management as well as to improve governance, including addressing ghost fishing. In 2021, in our strategic plan, our new strategic plan that runs from 2022 to 2030, there is a commitment, an objective, which says that we should promote active application of sustainable management practices to maintain stocks within safe biological limits, including use of measures to reduce ghost fishing based on the best available scientific information, traditional knowledge, and application of precautionary and ecosystems approach to fisheries. So let us just back up a bit. So what exactly is ghost fishing? Because I know the concept may not be that familiar with many people in the region. So ghost fishing refers to the environmental problem that is caused by abandoned, lost, or otherwise discarded fishing gear. And referred to as ALDFG, or simply ghost fishing. And ghost gear include a wide range of fishing gear: trawl nets, gill nets, seine nets, lines, traps, and other equipment that for whatever reason have been left in the ocean, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and which these gears are no longer under the control of the fishers. So they are in the sea, they're able to continue fishing. So in some cases, fishers may intentionally abandon their fishing gear because they don't think they need it anymore. Some may intentionally abandon it if they're involved in IUU fishing and feel that they could be caught. They very often abandon their gear and try to get away to avoid detection and prosecution. But also, fishing gear may be lost during severe weather system. Hurricane, for example, is when in the region we have a lot of fishing gear being lost at sea. But sometimes the equipment malfunction and they get lost. So they may be lost or abandoned deliberately for various reasons. The problem is these gear, they remain on the ocean, and some of them can continue to fish, to trap and kill fish and other marine organisms for years, many years. They smother marine habitats. They may move around by the action of ocean currents and really smother and damage important marine habitats and ecosystems. And they may also pose a hazard for navigation. So ghost gear is recognized as among the most, or the single most harmful form of marine debris. And it's a form of debris that's in the marine environment, but the most harmful form of marine debris, in the sense that they continue to fish, as I just mentioned. So it is indeed a very serious problem that affects the health of the oceans, the sustainability of fisheries and fish stocks, and ultimately the livelihood of fishers and food security and job security in the region. And it's no surprise that efforts have been made globally as well as in the region to address this problem of ghost fishing. So there have been a number of initiatives aimed at finding, retrieving, and repurposing these gears, or properly disposing of them. And efforts are also directed at promoting responsible fishing practices that will minimize gear loss. And also to develop sustainable fishing gear designs that minimize the impact of abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gears. Now, in recent times, actually earlier this year, the Ministerial Council, when they had their meeting in May, they issued a fairly comprehensive resolution, a very important policy document dealing with abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear. And they recognize that abandoned, lost, and otherwise discarded fishing gear is the most harmful form of marine debris, being purposely designed to capture aquatic life and being prolific wherever fishing occurs. I'm just gonna, the whole resolution is there, but I'm just gonna highlight a few of the paragraphs. And they further highlight that one of the objectives of the CRFM is to promote effective management and sustainable development of the living marine and other aquatic resources within the jurisdiction of member states, and noting that abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear is a significant threat to these resources in the Caribbean, specifically, and hence the achievement of the objective of the CRFM would be compromised if we do not pay attention to this problem. The resolution in the active part of it goes on to emphasize, the Council emphasize the critical importance of addressing this most harmful form of marine debris and creating effective plan to prevent, mitigate, and remediate ghost fishing in line with international best practices and standards. And it, gives the instruments that sets out the best practices. The resolution reaffirms the region's support for the Global Ghost Gear Initiative and its work in raising awareness and building capacity to prevent ghost fishing in the region. Also called on member states to commit to developing specific action plans to deal with the problem of ghost fishing in the EEZ, and also to advocate for specific measures to reduce ghost fishing in the plastic treaty that is being negotiated. So in conclusion, ghost fishing is a very serious problem in our region. We are, however, making progress at both the policy level and on the ground in addressing this. But much more needs to be done. And we need to improve awareness and understanding of the problem and what we can do, we together, all stakeholders, can do to prevent it. As we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the CRFM, we want to use this opportunity to highlight this problem and to strengthen our resolve and our partnership and network to reduce and prevent abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear and ghost fishing in the region. Madam Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Milton. Colleagues, I would ask you to, if we're going to keep the questions for the moderated session, so if you can make note of your questions, if you want, you can put it in the chat. I'll try to keep track of them, but they may get lost. So just keep a note of your questions. So we'll move on to our next presenter, who is Mr. Joel Baziuk, and he will be presenting on the Caribbean efforts as part of the international efforts by the GGGI to address ghost fishing.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for that great introduction, Milton. I can still remember meeting you for the first time in 2018 in Montserrat at the CRFM annual meeting, where this sort of journey for us at least started. So it's a delight to be here today. I'm going to give just a quick overview of the situation in a global context. I won't spend a lot of time on it. Milton's done some of that already, which is great. And then go into a little bit about the GGGI to contextualize who we are and where we come into play, and then talk a little bit about the work that we've done in the Caribbean to date, which of course via the continued partnership and the formalization of this MOU signing, we hope to expand on that work in future years and build on what we've done in the region. I do apologize if I go through these fairly quickly. The slides will be available to anyone. I'm happy to make them available after the fact to anyone who wants to see them. But without further ado, I won't go into a lot of detail here about what is ghost gear. I think Milton's gone into a lot of detail there. It is the single most harmful form of marine debris because it's purposely designed to capture aquatic life, and it does that very well, whether it's under the control of a fisher or whether it's lost for any number of reasons. As to how much is out there, the truth is nobody really knows. In a global context, it's very difficult to come to that number, but more recent studies have suggested that it could make up 46 to 70%. Actually, that number needs to be changed. 86% now of the floating macroplastic in the ocean gyres. That is specific to the gyres. That cannot be attributed to the ocean writ large, but at the same time, it's a significant problem. And that's just what's on the surface, not what's underneath the water, which is obviously a big concern as well. And an estimated 5 to 30% of harvestable fish stocks, depending on where you are. Of course, this is not ubiquitous, is killed by ghost gear every year, which, as Milton mentioned, is a major threat to global food security, coastal communities, and fisher livelihoods. When we talk about the impacts of gear, I just wanted to stress a couple of different things. So first of all, most people talk about the mortality of harvestable species or vulnerable marine animals, birds, marine megafauna, those kinds of things, and that's definitely a major concern. But there's also potential impact to habitat, benthic damage from nets and heavy structures, traps, things like that on coral reefs of particular concern in the Caribbean. The social impact, recreational value of coastal waters when they're littered with lost fishing gear can have an impact on the social license to operate. This is also a concern in the Caribbean. Potential vector for aquatic alien species, so transport of non-indigenous species across ecological barriers. Ghost gear does not recognize national borders. Navigation hazards, including fouling and entanglement of propellers and rudders, not only for fishing vessels, but other forms of marine traffic as well. And it also contributes to microplastics. So as net and rope degrades in the UV light from the sun, it will break down into microplastics, which cause a whole suite of other problems. So it's not just about the immediate entanglement threat, but it's about all of these different things as well and how they impact ecosystems, not just locally where gear is lost, but across transboundary movement as well. Causes of gear, I won't get into this. I mean, in the Caribbean, obviously climate change, as Milton mentioned as well, creating more frequent and more intense storms, which the Caribbean has always had to deal with, but certainly becoming more intense now as a major reason for gear loss. But there are a lot of different legitimate reasons that gear gets lost out there. I think we want to stress that this is not generally, by and large, fishers throwing gear over the side of their boat as a means of disposal. And where that does happen, it's usually due to a lack of disposal facilities or lack of other options, particularly in the Caribbean context where even landfilling is a very difficult challenge on small islands. So there are a lot of both direct and indirect causes for it, but it's not necessarily fishers just not caring about the environment. We need to make sure that people are educated about that. This is not generally what's happening. So what is the GGGI? Who do we represent? Under Ocean Conservancy, our host organization, the Global Ghost Gear Initiative is the only cross-sectoral alliance driving solutions to ALDFG or ghost gear around the world. Our aims are to improve the health of aquatic ecosystems, protect aquatic life from harm, safeguard human health and livelihoods. All of those things are equally important, and they're all intertwined. So we want to prevent gear from becoming lost by promoting best practices, mitigate impacts of gear that does unavoidably get lost through things like escape hatches and traps and things like that, which I'll get into in a bit, some of the things we've been testing in Jamaica, as well as remediating effects of gear from targeted removal efforts in sensitive habitats. We do have a global reach, 136 member organizations from around the world, 20 supporting governments from around the world. Again, this platform is about bringing people together, sharing knowledge and expertise, and bringing people around the same table to talk about how we can address this problem on a global scale. But as much as it's about working on a global scale, it's also about recognizing the local variables that make each individual situation around ALDFG unique, whether it's benthic habitat, species that are being fished, fishing methodologies and gear types, weather patterns, regulation measures. Every situation is unique, and we do work at the local level as well as the global level as well. Just a couple of documents that might be of interest to people, and I think these are in the resources section, as was mentioned earlier, our best practice frameworks for the management of fishing and aquaculture gear, which are meant to be comprehensive documents referencing all actors in the seafood supply chain. So practical information on what fishers and vessel operators, fishers regulators and management authorities, gear technology companies, academia, what steps they can take practically right now to try to address this issue at scale. So those documents are available on our website or via the CRFM's resources section as well. Also just wanted to mention we have our GGGI data portal as well, which houses the largest collection of ghost gear records on Earth. We have records from all over the world, from very small organizations to massive research organizations, and national governments, including the Government of Canada, contributing all of their data to this portal as well, in an effort to make all of this data as accessible as possible for the purposes of research. For those who'd like more information on that, feel free to reach out to me after, and you can see the address for the portal there. We have been doing a lot of work on government engagement, not only in the Caribbean, but definitely in the Caribbean as well. And a lot of the work that we've been doing is about assessing national fisheries risk when it comes to ALDFG, doing predictive modeling in national waters, which we've done in several Caribbean nations, development of management plans, which is one thing that we've also done for the Caribbean region, and supporting relevant projects in national waters. So just a quick note that we have been working with member states for many years to work on this issue directly. Just a snapshot of some of the solutions projects we have around the world, and of course our Caribbean project up in the top right, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail. So this project did start out. This is the first CRFM meeting that we had attended. There's Alan Pontine from Montserrat, who I know this is on the line as well. Hello, Alan. First time that I got a chance to meet you there as well, and was the first Caribbean nation to sign on to the Global Ghost Gear Initiative as well. The work that we're doing has expanded now into Belize, Grenada, Jamaica, Montserrat, and now most recently Trinidad and Tobago. And I'll go through briefly a couple of the pieces that we have been doing in those regions. We've done some capacity building regional workshops in various places. COVID put a bit of a damper on that, and most of these had to be done virtually. We've also done some, so we did some in Jamaica, some in Belize. We also have done some in coordination with the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute, or the GCFI. And so that's sort of a starting point to sort of get an understanding of what the baseline is and what the specific challenges are for each individual nation. And we've also done some fisher surveys and predictive modeling in Belize, Grenada, Jamaica, Montserrat, and Trinidad and Tobago. And the idea here is to actually have interviews on the ground with fishers to understand what are the key drivers of gear loss, because it will vary. And one of the things we know from being a global organization, but one of the things that was very much re-emphasized in our engagement with the Caribbean is that individual nations very different. Even if they're fishing the same species, the gear might be totally different. The conditions in which they're fishing are totally different. So the Caribbean is not a ubiquitous, obviously to everyone on the line here, is not a ubiquitous region, and we need to take those local considerations into consideration rather, in trying to get at the key drivers and predict why gear might be lost and where it might be lost, so that we can further inform fisheries management decisions and future gear retrieval efforts. We've also done some gear testing in Jamaica, so testing both the smart buoy from Blue Ocean Gear to track gear in real time. So if it does get lost, fishers can find it, as well as the rescue unit devices, which you see there. They're the smaller yellow device, and they are a combination of an escape hatch and also an emergency retrieval buoy. So we've done some extensive testing with the Jamaica National Fisheries Authority, and I see Shalene is also on the line here today, who we've been working with. Hello, Shalene, good morning. And looking forward to continuing this work out at sea. And fishers have been very positive. Of course, cost of the gear has been a concern that we need to deal with, but the functionality of the gear, by and large, has been proven to be effective. We've also done some UAV imagery and machine learning to try to identify ALDFG from UAV or drone surveys over the water. We've done that in Belize, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. You can see just a quick snapshot there of the AI automatically identifying lobster boxes in Jamaican waters. And the regional action plan, which has been mentioned, based on the GGGI best practice framework, we've done stakeholder engagement with fisheries managers, the CRFM, as well as the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute. And incorporating their feedback, we have created a draft regional action plan. The structure of the action plan is about similar to our best practice framework. There's a background and rationale, an overview of Caribbean fisheries, and the rationale for creating the action plan, and then the gear class risk assessment and recommendations based on specific feedback and knowledge gained from our work within the Caribbean. It addresses, again, fisher and vessel operators and fisheries organizations, so fisheries cooperatives, as well as fisheries managers and regulators in this current iteration. And they're, of course, geared towards being simple, effective, pragmatic, affordable solutions given the Caribbean context. So stakeholder engagement and feedback is something we take very seriously. It's something that I think is still, I wouldn't consider this a regional action plan to be final. I don't know that it ever will be, to be honest. We're always looking for more feedback so that we can adapt it and ensure it is fit for purpose. So we are still interested in getting feedback from Caribbean member states and others that might have feedback to provide. So anyone who's interested in that document, pardon me, let me know, and we can have a conversation about that. So again, it's about the GGGI, fisheries managers, fishers, all working together to come up with what is a reasonable and realistic action plan that can be applied at the national and the subnational level. I will leave it there in the interest of time. I know we have other presenters. My contact information is on the slide for those who might want to reach out. And again, my sincere thanks to the CRFM for allowing us to be present on this today. We're very excited about this, and congratulations again on your 20th anniversary. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I think part of your presentation dovetails nicely into the next presentation from Dr. Tricia Lovell on research and innovative technologies and or strategic solutions to ghost fishing. Tricia, over to you.
So thank you again for this invitation, and again, thank you to Amrikha and of course to Milton and Joel for your very thorough presentations. I feel like now it's probably, I don't have a lot to add, but I will try my best to at least broaden the discussion on ALDFG in the Caribbean and ghost fishing. So I am basically looking at strategic solutions to ALDFG and ghost fishing, looking at research gaps and opportunities within the context of the Caribbean. My presentation isn't very long, so again, just to reiterate what we've already said, and we already know it's probably been that ALDFG is characterized as perhaps the most dangerous form of marine debris in the global ocean. Of course, we know that it causes severe threat to marine wildlife habitats, coastal and marine habitats, economic stability of fisheries systems, and so on. And so we also know within the context of the Caribbean, there are a number of significant knowledge gaps remaining regarding its scale and impact, particularly as it relates to small-scale fisheries as well as recreational fisheries. And like other marine environmental challenges, ALDFG is a very complex one. The other thing I wanted to draw attention to. Generally speaking, we think about ALDFG only within the context of fisheries, but I think we also need to broaden our view of this issue. ALDFG is a multi-sectoral, multi-scale challenge. It lies at the nexus of fisheries management, but there are also other sectors and areas that are of consideration. So we also have to think of it in the context of environmental governance, solid waste management, and maritime transport. It represents a multi-scale challenge in that we also need to think about the solutions, not just locally, but also nationally, regionally, and globally, and how all of those levels of governance interact. It is both a transboundary and a local fisheries challenge, and its distribution and transport may be affected by climatic factors, including climate change. And as we all know, within the Caribbean, we have been suffering with the issue of sargassum, and it has also been found in association with sargassum in the region. So it is a very complex issue. I think Joel touched on this a little bit. Of course, the drivers of ALDFG are many. Environmental drivers we are quite familiar with. We have things like strong currents and weather, wildlife interactions, benthic obstructions, but there are also other drivers within the context of fisheries management. So failures in our fishery systems, weaknesses in compliance may also increase the likelihood of fishers abandoning gear at sea. Or you could have conflict drivers in terms of conflicts with other gear or navigating vessels, or operational drivers in terms of how and the manner in which the gear is deployed or retrieved, or poor maintenance of gear. All of these things can contribute to gears being lost. One of the issues within the Caribbean region is, and not just in the Caribbean region, I think probably within the realm of a lot of fisheries management, ALDFG has not specifically been prioritized. And this is, for a number of reasons. Obviously, time and resources and human capacity within the governments is a challenge. And again, as I've said, it has largely been seen as a fisheries issue, and therefore it may not have been given attention by other sectors such as waste management or maritime sectors. And so we also need to think about how we can broaden, not just from the fisheries point of view, but some of these other sectors and how we can bring them aboard. Obviously, some of the reasons for it not being prioritized may be things like the fact that ALDFG is largely a hidden threat. It's underwater, so you can't see it, so people don't realize it's an issue. You have lack of data and information, you have limited capacity again, and then lack of awareness. And all of these things together can and have contributed to ALDFG not being prioritized. There are other factors that might be hindering governance of ALDFG in the region. Some of the barriers that might be affecting our institutions, policy planning processes, and structures of governance. Issues such as the lack of clear policy directives, ALDFG laws, fragmentation, issues of, again, financing, human and financial and technical capacity, lack of clear mandates, limited enforcement, and of course, lack of awareness across the board. So we also need to think about how can we overcome some of these barriers to governance as well within the region. So in order to get to a more holistic life cycle management of the issue, we need to broaden from fisheries management measures to other sectors. And in order to do that, we need data, information, and research to have a more holistic management approach to ALDFG. And this means that we need to start plugging some of these knowledge gaps. And some of the most critical ones, as I've alluded to before, ALDFG associated with recreational small-scale fisheries. We really need to start thinking about within the region how we can start to get the knowledge and information to be able to understand how some of these other fishery sectors are impacting or resulting in ALDFG. How can we also look at issues of uncovering direct and indirect drivers of ALDFG in local fishery systems? As Joel rightly said, a lot of the drivers are specific to fisheries. They're not universal. Okay, so we really need to start looking specifically at the national fisheries and trying to uncover the specific and direct drivers that are affecting those fisheries. We also need to think about within the region how climate change impacts or is impacted by ALDFG, and really looking at kind of bridging that knowledge gap. And then again, looking at fisheries specific ALDFG production rates for the Caribbean region in order to be able to better understand the issues that we are facing locally as well as regionally. And of course, then in terms of how we get to the next stage, we need to start thinking about how we can, as a region, start to build awareness, not just for fisheries managers and fishers, but for other sectors as well. How we can build capacity and training, how we can leverage our existing regional networks. I think both the CRFM and the GGGI have been really good at kind of building this connection and strengthening that connection. But maybe we need to also think more broadly about how we can bring in some other networks. The Caribbean Environmental Program, I think there's been a lot of collaboration with GCFI, but there are other entities that we also need to bring on board. We also need to look at how we can review and update some of the policies and legislation within the region to deal with the issue. And then how can we also look at informing the data through the institution of no fault reporting schemes. I think that's probably it for my presentation. Thank you again for inviting me to be a part of today's discussion, and I look forward to the next presentation.
Thank you so much, Tricia. Our last presenter, closing the baton in the session. We have Dr. Daana Kanhai from UWI St. Augustine, who will be talking about the national efforts to address ghost fishing in the marine waters of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Kanhai, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Warm greetings from Trinidad and Tobago. I am actually the most junior member on this esteemed panel, as you will shortly hear, in terms of years of experience dealing with this issue of abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear. But I'll tell you my story and I'll tell you what we're working on. So in 2019, I was first appointed to UNEP's Scientific Advisory Committee on Marine Litter and Microplastics. And we had our first in-person meeting in Kenya. When we went across to Kenya, one of the questions that the representatives were asked was, what's the status of plastic pollution in your region? You know, what's going on? And I admit at that time that I could not comprehensively answer the question. So when I came back home, I spoke to my head of department, Professor Judith Gobin, and I indicated to her, look, this is something that we need to focus our attention on. So what I started doing was that I started looking at the literature, anything that had been published from 1980 to 2020, to see what we knew about this issue of marine debris. It was very apparent that this was not an issue that had cropped up overnight. Actually, we were dealing with a very persistent issue. We had reports on it since the 1980s, and those reports kept on coming. What we did know was we knew quite a lot about land-based sources of pollution. We didn't know very much about marine sources of this debris. And so that was an identified research gap. What is also, or was also very evident, is that we were dealing with a transboundary issue. So because we're located in the Caribbean and we have these oceanic currents operating, these oceanic currents are bringing debris into our region. They're causing the debris to, circulate within our region, and in some cases as well, leave our region. So beyond national action, it was really very important to have collective regional action. Now, I first presented these findings in 2021 at the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute Conference, the 74th conference. And lo and behold, in my technical session, we had Joel Baziuk and Tricia Lovell. And since that time, Joel and Tricia were talking about the issue of ALDFG. And I remember very clearly that Joel said, well, there's actually only a handful of Caribbean countries that are doing these baseline assessments. And Tricia, she spoke about the amazing work that she'd been doing in the Eastern Caribbean. And I thought, okay, so Trinidad and Tobago needs to be among those countries. So fast forward 2 years later, we were the recipients of 2 small grants. And what we then did was that we sort of collated a diverse series of stakeholders from the national, arena, regional, as well as international. So I must say public thanks, of course, to the Acting Director of Fisheries, Ms. Narissa Lucky, and her colleagues at the Fisheries Division for their support, as well as to Mr. Garth Otley of the Division of Food Security, because they really did lend support when we asked for help. Additionally, on this project, we have a colleague from the Institute of Marine Affairs, Mr. Hamish Asmath, as well as we have several fieldwork assistants and data assistants, especially Sarah Benjamin, one of our recent graduates. When you have somebody that's an expert in an issue that you are newbie in, you ask them for help. And so I immediately reached out to Tricia Lovell and I asked her, would she be a collaborator? So Tricia is one of our collaborators on this project. We also have, of course, Joel, who really was instrumental in helping us to get that grant from Ocean Conservancy. But in the international arena as well, we do have, and we have had support from the FAO, especially from Mr. Haraldur Ines and Hali, as we fondly call him. And then we have 2 other colleagues, one from Norway, one from the UK, Isabel and Ellis. So it's quite a multidisciplinary team that we have amassed. Now, the overall goal of our project really is to better understand the issue of abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear in Trinidad and Tobago. We have 7 objectives for our project. The first 5 objectives, of course, are based primarily on fisher surveys, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But some of the things that we want to be able to do is, of course, to estimate how much plastic waste is entering the coastal and marine environment as a result of ALDFG. What are some of the causes of fishing gear loss here in Trinidad and Tobago? What practices are fishers actually using to avoid gear loss, Beyond these first 5 sort of core objectives, we also have, as objective 6, we wanted to be able to identify hotspots of ALDFG accumulation in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is where we had collaboration with the IMA and Hamish Asmath. And then our final objective, of course, which Tricia is leading, is really to do a gap analysis, to look at our legislation, to look at our regulations and policies, to see, what are the gaps as it relates to the management of ALDFG here in Trinidad and Tobago. Again, we really want to inform interventions. As I mentioned to you before, when I first heard that there were other Caribbean countries that were doing these baseline assessments, I really advocated for using the same instrument that they were using, such that there could be comparability across our region. So the instrument that we use was one that was developed by the FAO, and this is where Hali came in and he provided training to the entire team. Additionally, before we even went out into the field, one of the things that Hali emphasized was that we needed to make sure that we had support from the national focal points, because we needed to get data about the numbers of vessels that were using the different gear types, right? And that really was so that we could estimate or establish a minimum sample size. And we did get that support both from the Fisheries Division, as I mentioned to you before, and the Division of Food Security in Tobago. The data that they provided to us indicated that there are 3 dominant gear types that are used by the artisanal fishers. So we have the gill nets, we have the traps, and we have the hooks and lines. That data that they provided also allowed us to be able to establish our minimum sample size. So fieldwork for this project took place between the months of February to April. We had 6 amazing fieldwork assistants that literally went to every coast in Trinidad and Tobago. At this point, I also thank the fishers, because if they did not agree to be interviewed, we would not have a project. Yeah. What you would notice is that we could not visit every single landing site, but we tried to ensure that there was good coverage on each of the coasts in Trinidad and each, of course, in Tobago. In total, we had 354 fishers being interviewed during that time, and each of these fishers were from different vessels, and they were using, as I mentioned before, the 3 gear types that I identified. Now, because of time constraints, it was not my intention to actually present findings from this project. I'll just share one set of preliminary findings, actually. So the first person that I actually spoke to about this issue of ALDFG in Trinidad and Tobago was one of the fisheries officers, Nadia Ramphal. And Nadia had attended a workshop in Panama. But one of the first things that Nadia told me is that we need resources to engage in removal efforts. We had a conversation about a wreck in the Gulf of Paria, and that's located on the west coast of Trinidad, and there was gear entangled there. And she said, if only we had resources, we could remove that gear. So Nadia really was one of the people that inspired this hotspot mapping. So what we did was that we designed 4 questions. We asked the officials, well, where have you lost gear? Can you tell us of known locations where gear presently exists in our waters? This information would be very important if we were to move forward and engage in removal efforts. So this is just a snapshot of some of the things that we are finding. As I mentioned to you before, our goal really is to inform interventions. There are lots of other things happening as it relates to ALDFG in Trinidad and Tobago. I will leave it here for now as it relates to our project. Happy to take questions, but I'll leave it here for now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kanhai. We want to crave your indulgence for a few minutes to facilitate the signing of the MOU between CRFM and GGGI, which will facilitate cooperation to combat ALDFG in CRFM member states. And I think that is important because one of the questions that came up was how can some member states were asking how can the work that GGGI is doing in some of our member states expand to others. And I believe Milton responded that this MOU will achieve that very thing by expanding the association to all CRFM participating states. So I'm going to hand over to the executive director and his team to take us through the session of the signing of the MOU. Milton, over to you.
We have negotiated this document over some time, and we're very, very pleased at this point to be able to execute this agreement. It really marks a significant milestone in our collective efforts to protect our fisheries and our marine ecosystems. As we have just heard, ghost fishing is a significant problem and we have to deal with it. And as you heard from Joel in his presentation, the GGGI is doing a fantastic job globally as well as in the region in dealing with this. So we are extremely pleased to be able to partner with GGGI in strengthening our capacity and efforts to address abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear. So we will just proceed now to sign this agreement that establishes a framework for us to work together in a collaborative manner. And this is really designed to provide support and help, expert resources and advice to our member states in doing the things that we need to do in order to effectively address this problem of ghost fishing. I would like to invite Joel to say a few words before we then go on and sign the document.
Thank you, Milton. Really appreciate it. I'll be brief. I share and I completely echo your sentiments. Since the first time I was in Montserrat, sitting in that room with you and with Peter and with Alwyn and the rest, this was sort of the goal. I think the long-term goal was to how can we actually systematically address this issue in the Caribbean, and getting an understanding from the presenters who were speaking from the member states on the challenges they've been facing on a variety of fishery sustainability issues, and seeing how this one could fit into that already outstanding body of work that CRFM has been doing for so long. This really is a culmination of the hard work that everyone has put in up to that time. And I say culmination in that this is the the signing of this sort of kind of historic agreement, and I think that this is a fantastic achievement. But it really marks the I would say the beginning of the next step, of the next phase, and where we can work directly with the 17 member states of the CRFM, and how can we help, how can we support, how can we work together to address this issue holistically in the region. So we're absolutely delighted, we're honored to be here and to have come this far. So thank you to Milton, the CRFM, the entire staff for making this happen, and yeah, really excited to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so we can now proceed to sign the documents, and we will make the document available to all of you. Excellent.
There we go.
That is it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Madam Chair, over to you.
Thank you. Congratulations. I'm echoing the applause that I'm seeing in the chat. So, so we have we will start with a session of about 25 minutes of questions, and then CRFM will advise me if we can extend. I see some raised hands in the chat. There is a queue.
Yes, Mr. Kong, you may go ahead.
I wish to thank Dr. Lovell, and by the way, congratulations, Doctor. But I want to thank you for pointing out that the issues are multi-sectoral problem, and marine litter and plastic can be seen as at the heart of the problem. And I also wish to thank Joel for pointing out that based on the data and information available, there's an estimated range, and a wide range, 46 to 86%, very, very wide range. We need to balance the narrative to put the contribution of fisheries and aquaculture in its proper context. I find the direct focus on fisheries kind of disturbing, and I'm not saying that it is not real in this instance. Perhaps it is, I don't know, but maybe it is. But then again, there's uncertainty. Listen to the wide range, 46 to 86%. But I find it disturbing where the sector is identified directly, but other sectors are referred to indirectly and lumped under general things like pollution and destruction of critical habitat. One rarely hears, for example, tourism and oil and gas's contribution to the mega global problem of pollution and plastic and all of these various things. So I just want to make that observation. I'm not saying that fisheries and aquaculture, I mean, I have not heard we talk about that, but I just want to make another observation that I have not heard that these other sectors contribute to the problem. And the thing is that when we start to look at a practical solution to this problem, we have to look at, as was mentioned by many of the panelists, the policy, the legal and institutional framework. And so the issue has to take into consideration that of the aquaculture sector, and also of the issue within the other aquatic ecosystems, the freshwater ecosystems, because there is similar type of gear being used in our rivers and lakes and through aquaculture. So there is this issue that we need to look at and make sure that the scope of the problem is properly contemplated. The other thing that I wanted to mention is I have not heard, and I'm sure that perhaps you can speak about this. MARPOL This is actually a binding international instrument now. From what I understand, MARPOL Annex 5 is now in force, especially the part that deals with fisheries. So I think some attention needs to be paid on that, and I'm sure you all know this, but because of the time that you have, we have not mentioned it. But just to also say that we all know, for instance, Jamaica, in the case of Jamaica, the national maritime authorities are the competent authority that administers MARPOL. And again, I have not heard or seen of any, and I'm sure that this is happening, that there are interactions and collaboration with where necessary, the national maritime authorities. And the last point I would like to perhaps mention, and again, I'm sure that you all know about this, but just for discussion and information, there is a current project, a goal letter project, and FAO is very much involved, that looks at this issue and focusing on legislation, the legal framework and policy framework for the marking of fishing gear. I will stop there. I know I've been going long, and if you allow me, Chair, I perhaps will intervene again. Thanks much.
Thanks. I'll hand over to the panel for their reactions. I think, I don't know if Milton will go first, and then Joel, and then anyone else who wants to chime in. And then the next question we'll have is from Dr. Grant. So I'll hand over to Milton to start the responses.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank Andre for that very important question. But my response would be that what he has put the issue on the table in the broader context, looking at marine pollution, marine litter, and so on. I think these broader issues didn't come up because we were actually focusing on the ghost gears, the fishing gear, and their particular impact on the marine environment and contribution towards the problem. But I think he's quite right in pointing out that we have to look at it in the broader context of all that is contributing to the problem of plastic pollution and marine debris, etc. And fisheries is by no means the only sector or activity that is contributing to this problem. It is, however, a fact that at the end of the day, fishing is a major activity in the marine environment, and fishing gear are being lost in the region, as you heard earlier, especially during storms. And when they're lost, they continue to fish. And so we have to look at the various measures that we can pursue, and the policies and the legislation, etc., that we need to put in place, at least to minimize the threats coming from the fisheries sector. So very good point, and thank you.
Yeah, if I could hop in. Thank you for that question. I think the question about changing the narrative, I'm really glad that was brought up, because speaking from the GGGI's perspective, I actually didn't get a chance to mention this earlier, in that my family goes back through fisheries support through my great-grandfather on both sides. As a matter of fact, my father, my aunts, my uncles, we've all worked in fisheries support. I worked in Canada's largest commercial fishing harbor for 20 years before I took on this role. If this was anything to do with anti-fishing, I wouldn't be involved with it personally. It's not. And changing that narrative is absolutely crucial. And that's something that we at the GGGI try to do. When you read a news article and you see a picture of an animal caught in a net, and you read some of the comments underneath it, people are ready to just burn the industry to the ground and say that all these awful fishers are doing these awful things. That's not what's happening. And that's why I wanted to point out earlier in my presentation, although I had to go through it pretty quickly, was that this isn't about blaming the industry at all. We work with fishers on the ground in every project we do around the world. And a lot of the time, it's about not only educating the fishers on what this is actually doing to, like, the cumulative effects of lost gear over decades is having an impact on the species which they're harvesting. Because I mean, unless they're doing dive work, they're probably not seeing the effects underwater. That's the experience I've had here in Canada. And it's not only about that, though. It's about understanding from them what are the key drivers. They're an absolutely critical stakeholder in this, and it's crucial that we change that narrative and make people understand what's actually going on out there. Yes, it's an issue, but it's one that fishers on the ground, generally speaking, in all of our projects, they're helping to solve the problem. They're not throwing gear over the side of their boats. So changing that narrative is crucial, and it's something that we keep at the forefront of everything that we do. You also talked about MARPOL, and it's, yes, I mean, MARPOL Annex 5 is a binding thing. The interpretation of Annex 5 when it comes to fishing gear has been challenged a little bit. And again, a lot of time it talks about the discharge of garbage, and a lot of the time gear loss, the interpretation of that has been different in that it's not necessarily garbage. A useful piece of gear that gets lost a lot of the time, and that's the primary thing. So enforcement of that is difficult, but again, it's not necessarily, this isn't an enforcement issue necessarily. It's about understanding the context in each location and working with fishers and local stakeholders to try to find solutions that work for them for the benefit of the industry, so that there can be more species to harvest, a healthier ecosystem. Everyone benefits from that. So that's the narrative I think we need to bring on board. And noted about Glow Litter as well. I think that's a finite program in terms of, Glow Litter had a start and an end date. It's been an excellent program. We work very closely with FAO, but the GGGI is here as a long-term lasting thing, and we'll see where things go from here. But all that is very valid. I'm glad that you pointed it out. I'm glad I had an opportunity to reply.
Thank you very much. I think we have Dr. Grant, and then we have Curtis Douglas. So, Dr. Grant?
Hi, thanks, Amrikha, and thanks to the speakers as well. I mean, it was very informative. I really enjoyed the presentation by Dr. Kanhai and the work that they're doing in Trinidad and Tobago. My question is, I mean, I've been working with some fishermen in the Eastern Caribbean, and I'm focusing mainly now on the fish traps, right? And when we start to talk about ghost fishing with these entities, they're of the opinion that because the chicken wire erodes so quickly in water, that they're not contributing to ghost fishing, and that's something that we have to change that perception. But I just wanted to get some of your feedback on specifically the traps. I mean, it's not marine, it's not plastics, but it's another element that is contributing. But I just wanted to hear your perspective on that. Thanks.
Okay. Joel, who's going to take this question? I think. Okay, Joel is going to. And Tricia. Okay,
I
so
don't want to dominate it though. So Tricia, if you'd like to head first.
So Tricia, then you can come in.
Sure.
Yeah, I can start. Just apologize if you hear a lot of noise. I'm on a train, so. But yeah, I think it is, yes, important. I think one of the things that came out of the work that I was doing is that traps really, within the context of the Eastern Caribbean, it is probably one of the most critical forms of ALDFG, certainly in a lot of the smaller islands. I know a lot of work has been done in regards to, trying to implement biodegradable panels within the traps, etc. And I think really we need, so we did some research in Antigua and Barbuda. I think Dominic did as well, and I think Milton had alluded to that. But it's certainly something that needs to grow, and something that needs to be implemented more strategically. I think once the experimentation phase was completed, it's not something that was strategically introduced within the fisheries. But yes, I think the other thing that is also critical is not just traps, but I think also one of the things that came out within some of the work I was doing, shore-based fisheries, the fisheries that is not managed in a lot of the Eastern Caribbean islands, but it's also one that has been shown to be causing problems, particularly in shallow areas where you have a lot of lines being tangled on these. I mean, that is something that also needs to to have some attention brought to as well.
Thank you, Tricia. So Joel and any of the other panelists, please, if you want to come in, I'll start with Joel.
Sure, I'll be brief. It's an interesting point, and actually it's quite topical in that we just had some fisher workshops in St. John, New Brunswick, and Halifax, Nova Scotia a couple of weeks ago, where we were talking with fishers on the ground about this very issue, and the issue of lobster traps on the east coast of Canada, which again, they're different traps. They're constructed differently, but they do have a wire frame. These fishers were doing removal work and pulling these traps up, and what they were finding, the fishers themselves, in this context, was that the wire traps, even though they had been down there, they had tags that were 30 years old, 40 years old. When they were pulling them up, even though they had been down there for a long time and the wire had started to deteriorate, they were still catching lobster. And a lot of the lobster, they said 85% of what they were finding in those traps was 10 to 15 pound lobster, really old broodstock that are capable of producing 250,000 eggs to continue the species. So that was quite disturbing to them. Now, again, your mileage may vary. It's not necessarily a direct one-to-one comparison with the Caribbean, but the same idea that traps will disintegrate over time and that they're probably not causing a lot of damage. That was their impression too, until they started pulling them up and finding that it was a different story. So what I would say is that it would be good to do some dedicated study on this to see what it's like in the Caribbean context and see if it's something similar.
Okay, I think Dr. Kanhai wanted to come in, and I'm seeing the hands going up. So I think, Dr. Kanhai, I will let you have the last word on this, and then we'll go to the next question.
Yes, thanks very much for that question, Dr. Grant. As Joel mentioned earlier, this issue of abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear, it's not homogeneous for the entire Caribbean. It's context specific. So at least here in Trinidad and Tobago, I mentioned before that the three predominant gear types that are being used are the gill nets, the hooks and lines, and the traps. Based on the preliminary data that we collected, actually it's the gill nets that fishers are indicating that they're losing quite frequently. So not so much for the traps. So maybe here in Trinidad and Tobago, the attention is really on some other gear types. Maybe in the Eastern Caribbean, the focus should be on traps. But just to say that this issue, it's very much context specific. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So Curtis, you've been waiting a long time. You have the floor.
Yes, good morning to you all. Curtis Douglas. I am the president of all Tobago Fisher Folks. So I represent Fisher Folks on basically the island of Tobago, Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, actually. Dr. Kanhai, to you, in Tobago, right? I don't know what or when you did the research, but I wasn't aware of it. My members wasn't aware of it. But some of the challenges we having in Tobago with goose fishing is that we have big boats and big rigs and stuff, oil companies and stuff that is passing in our waters that is cutting away the buoys and so you find the traps and when we go, the buoy will be gone, even though it have a beacon on it. You find it gonna drift away from the original spot from where you set it. Now, a long time ago, we used to use like landmark, but now we're using coordinates to find or to fish now. So it is very difficult now when these big oil companies and when they're operating on waters, when the boat comes and they cut away the traps and cut away the nets. So we find we have an increase in goose fishing in that aspect. So yes, and we also are faced with Dr. Kanhai, with also when we have gill nets or nets to catch flying fish. Sometimes we are often seen now when they catch the flying fish, I'm not going to call who fisher folks is doing that, but when they catch a flying fish, sometimes they load up so much they overfish. Sometimes they cut the nets away, so the nets is still killing the small baby flying fish on those that come to lake. So obviously it is making it a ghost fish and make it very difficult to the species that we depend on for our livelihood. So these are some of the main things that are affecting the society in Tobago. And obviously it have nets. Sometimes when these boats pass to these big ships, these big oil companies, when they send their rigs and stuff, when they pass, sometimes they pass in the night. So when they cut away the nets in the night, right, when you go back next morning or a couple of hours to check your nets and stuff, you can't find it. So sometimes it sinks and it is killing, sometimes it kills snappers, and it goes fishing, and it's making it difficult for our food resources in the Caribbean, right? So these are some of the major challenges that we are having coming out of Tobago. I can't speak for Trinidad, but I only could speak for Tobago. These are some of the major challenges on a day-to-day basis that the fishing society in Tobago, which is all Tobago fisher folk, are facing. So I will leave it as that as we get into more deeper conversation and we intend to correspond and have a more dialogue, you know, I could be able to reveal more information on this. So that's as they say in Tobago, my little 2 cents me want to share with you for the day. All right.
Thank you, Curtis. Dr. Kanhai, you want to respond?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Douglas, for your contribution. We did send correspondence to your organization. Unfortunately, we didn't hear back, but I'll be very much happy to speak to you. We are aware of some of those issues that you have raised because the fishers in Tobago did complete the survey. Those are some of the issues that they did raise to us. But I'm very keen to have a conversation with you, so I'll reach out to you again via email and WhatsApp.
Okay, so thank you very much. Now, I have 2 questions, 2 hands up. Terence, you have the floor.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and thanks to all the presenters. Now, it's going back a bit to the point that Sandra was making with regards to fish traps and the fishers' perception that they may not be ghost fishing because their main problem is one of the corrosion of their fishing gear, which is not even lasting for a season. Now, of course, we can have policy and other interventions, but I'd like to know if there are any experiences with regards incentivizing this change. What sort of incentives can we offer to fisher folk to facilitate this change? For example, would governments permit duty-free materials to come in if we want to change the materials in terms of the quality of the fishing materials for making the traps? Would governments permit duty-free or other incentives when we come to putting biodegradable panels and so on? So it's trying to get some impression as how do you incentivize change in this arrangement. Thank you.
So I think I would let Milton, can you start off the response on that question?
On the question of the traps, I think we need to recognize that in the Caribbean region, trap is a major gear that's used quite widely across the region in the reef fisheries in particular. And so we do have to pay attention to it. Now, the traps and the wire that's used to make the traps, these come in various grades, they call it, grade of wire. So some are thinner and weaker and will biodegrade faster, even though it will still take a few months. Others can stay for quite a while, can continue to fish for much longer, and a part of it is actually the cost. There's a significant difference in cost of the different grade of mesh wire that's used in these traps. So Terence mentioned the issue of providing some incentives to use perhaps use traps that are more resilient, can last longer. The solution that has been pursued and was mentioned earlier, both by Tricia and I mentioned it briefly, is the use of biodegradable panels in these traps. because if you can have mesh wire that can last for 18 months, 2 years, or even more. If that is lost, especially during hurricane, which is when they're usually lost, or other severe weather, then that can be a problem. If you have the biodegradable panel in it, after some weeks, the panel would fall off, and so the fish would have an escape gap, and I think that is very good. No, much more is needed to. Well, I think the research has been done, and quite a few research projects have looked at this in the region, but introducing it and working with fishers to adopt and use it, requires much more support, some incentives from government, and others who were supporting fishers, could be helpful in transitioning to traps with biodegradable panel. But they are a lot of these things are site specific, as Dr. Kanhai mentioned, and so you really have to look and customize your solution on the basis of the circumstances in the fisheries itself. And while I have the floor on this, I think it's important to recognize that fishers generally do not want to lose their traps, because I think somebody mentioned in the chat, they are very expensive. They spend a lot of money buying these traps or their fishing gear. So they have every reason to want to keep their traps, manage them properly, and ensure that they are not lost, because when they lose trap, they're losing money. So that's a good basis to start working with them, because we're protecting their interest as well in avoiding and preventing ghost gears. And so I think this is something that fishers would be very willing to work with governments and other stakeholders on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. So what I'm going to do, in the interest of managing the time, is we have Dr. Marsden from Jamaica and we have Dr. Grant. I'm going to take both questions, and then we'll let the entire panel respond to whichever part of the question they want to respond to, so that we can then bring the discussion to a close. Does that sound fair, CRFM team?
Sounds
Okay.
great.
Okay, so Dr. Marsden, can you pose your question, and then Dr. Grant, and then I'll hand over to the panel.
All right, good morning again, guys. Good presentation. In the interest of time, let me just be brief. There are some things that I'm looking at here. Taryn spoke about incentives, but I'm talking about an incentive now on a different angle. For example, do we have repositories that are out there where fishers can take these equipment or these whatever they find, so it can be identified at a later date as to exactly, or get a statistical breakdown of what exactly are out there. The other thing is, can these be used to identify whether it is IUU fishing that is causing these ghosts that are in other countries? Because Jamaica might very much be a part of the GGGI, but another country is not. But they're fishing in Jamaican waters, for example, and they're leaving all these traps, and then they stay there and become ghosts, and it affects us even though we are a part of it, right? We know that in the Caribbean, we have something they call jungle justice. If somebody is found removing another person's property, they take justice in their own hands. How are we going to now encourage fishers out there to remove some of these traps that they see under the water, without feeling fear that if they remove it, then they might be charged upon as if they're stealing stuff? So do we have a PR program, TV, radio, whatever is there, to let persons know what we are all doing? As I said, in the interest of time, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Dr. Grant, you want to pose your question? Dr. Grant, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just saying that Dr. Marsden hit it on the head. And my question is the cleanup aspect. How do we tackle the cleanup from a community perspective? And as Dr. Marsden said, without appearing as if you're stealing somebody's trap. What should we do? What are your thoughts, panel, on this? Thank you.
All right, so the panel, over to you. You could react to the last two questions, or if you have any remaining statements you want to make on any of the questions you heard. So I'll go in the order in which you spoke. So we'll start with Milton, then Joel, then Tricia, if she's still on the train, and then LaDana.
Right.
So Milton.
Okay. Let me start with Marsden's questions. I didn't get all his questions. The first point I didn't get, but okay, with the IUU, the fact that it's contributes to ghost fishing, I mean, that's the reality. At the end of the day, the way to deal with that, in my opinion, is to try to stop the IUU in the first place and impose some serious fines on them, some serious penalty, and really through your legislation and enforcement action, try to prevent them from coming in your water in the first place. Okay, but if the gear are abandoned by the IUU fishers, then they're in your water and they're a problem and you have to clean up. So in that case, if you know that it's IUU, you can identify it as such, then, you know, the best option is to retrieve it, take it out of the water. If you want to repurpose it, sell it to somebody else, or, you know, I think that's fine. But you want to get it out of the water and make sure that it doesn't continue to fish. It could be discarded if you don't want to sell it. But that's, you know, a position that should be made by the national authorities based on your plan for dealing with ghost fishing, because I think each country needs to have a plan that is customized for their local situation to respond to the challenges. Now, the issue of well, it's actually IUU also, because the second point of Marsden's question, it is IUU. It could be IUU, because if somebody's gear is there and it's a legitimate fishing gear, you need to be able to distinguish that from lost and abandoned or discarded fishing gear. So I know sometimes it may not be easy. So I think some caution is required, and a structured approach is needed in going and retrieving somebody else's gear. So my suggestion is that, look, if you're going to, and this would also touch on Sandra's question, if you're going to clean up and have a campaign to remove gears that you think are ghost gear, you should have a plan. You should work with the local fishers and other authorities to make sure that this is done in a structured and consistent manner to minimize the risk of taking up the legitimate traps or gear of person. Of course, with nets and so on, sometimes, you know, you can easily identify when it's lost and tangled and, you know, is not under the control of fishers. So it may not be that difficult to identify these gears in most cases, but there may be some where, you know, one would need to be careful, because if you're taking somebody's gear that they left there to fish, you could then be accused of IUU fishing. Thank you.
Okay.
Let me just say one thing more, just closing off. At the end of the day, one of the messages that I think we need to make clearly is the fact that the fisheries sector recognize this problem. I think many fishers recognize this problem, and we're in the forefront of trying to to address it. We have been for some time, and so this is very important to make that point always, because so often you get the impression, people give the impression that fisheries, fisher folk, are not concerned about these things and their health and the health of the marine environment and the health of the marine ecosystems. So it is really refreshing in my mind to see all the efforts and the interest on the part of fishing communities and fishers in addressing this problem. So they have been in the forefront of efforts to deal with it, and I know that they are by and large very committed to working in partnership with governments and other stakeholders in preventing ghost fishing and losing their fishing gear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Joel, responses to the questions and closing remarks?
Thank you. I'll be brief in the interest of time. I think it's a really good point to bring up. This is a situation that we run into in other parts of the world as well. For example, in Canada, the United States, I believe the United Kingdom, there's a law in place where no fisher can actually interact with another fisher's gear, and it's to prevent. It was intended when it was drafted decades ago to prevent fishers from stealing gear or whatever it's going to be. But the residual effect of that is now that there are ghost gear removal programs in place, that they can't actually remove gear that's not theirs without a special permit. So there's a whole permitting issue and a lot of things that they need to go through, and sometimes that's not conducive to them removing gear during fishing operations. So I think at the end of the day, what needs to be done, and I think that this MOU between CRFM and GGGI will help with this, is that we can convene the right people in the right places through government roundtables, which we've done before, or workshops that have fisheries managers and fishers in the same room to chat through some of these issues from different countries. But at the end of the day, it's about collaboration with the member states, with the fishers themselves, maybe through co-ops or whatever is the most appropriate mechanism, depending on what we're talking about and where, to really understand what the barriers are and to chat through them. And once people make those connections, it makes life a lot easier. I think also gear marking is something that can help not necessarily prevent the loss, but it can help identify what gear is active and what gear is illegal. So if there are enforcement agencies that are out there, they can remove the illegal gear that's not correctly marked. And it's a relatively simple step. It's outlined clearly in the best practice framework that the GGGI has produced, as well as the voluntary guidelines for the marking of fishing gear from FAO. Maybe it's just simple regulatory measures that can be taken that aren't onerous for the fishers to have to deal with, but they can help work towards this. So what we found is it's always pulling on a bunch of different levers to get the machine to work. But the first step, I think, is getting the right people in the same room to chat through what is going to work in a practical context. And I think that's where this MOU is really influential, in that it can help the CRFM and the GGGI connect in starting to find ways to do that. On the cleanup question, very quickly, again, it's going to depend on what type of gear we're talking about. The traps in Belize are very different from the traps in Jamaica, for example. They both fish spiny lobster, very different traps, very different environments, which means your retrieval methods for locating, first of all, and removing them will be very different. But I think identifying them, our approach has been to do some predictive modeling to try to identify where is gear most likely to be lost in the countries in which we've been working. And then the next step is to go verify where gear actually is and remove it from the most critically sensitive habitat. So I think that's the approach we're taking, is first you need to know where it's lost, then you need to actually go out and try to find it and identify the appropriate method, whether it's grappling or diving or ROV work or whatever it's going to be. But again, very context dependent. But I'll leave it there in the interest of time. But there's a lot of discussions, and I'm sure that we could go on for a very long time, and hopefully we will on future events.
Okay, thank you very much, Tricia. Responses and closing words.
Yes, so I think what both Dr. Grant and Dr. Marsden have pointed out really re-emphasizes the need for holistic management of this issue. Because even if we start talking about remediation and removing the gear, we have to be able to manage the gear once it comes to shore, and really ensuring that we have the mechanisms in place to be able to collect and transport. We have space to be able to either recycle or discard of these remediated gear. And then Beyond that, we need to think about, do we have the mechanisms in place to be able to locate? So do we have reporting mechanisms in place? So all these supporting infrastructure that needs to be a part of any remediation effort really also needs to be considered. So we need to be very strategic as we really try to tackle this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tricia. Dr. Kanhai, you have the last word.
Yes, so my closing comments are just that, one, we're not pointing the fingers at the fishers at all, because when we think of the issue of plastic pollution, 80% is coming from land-based sources, about approximately 20% is coming from marine-based sources. So we're not pointing fingers. The second thing is that when we think about waste management, you know, you have the whole hierarchy of approaches, prevention, mitigation, whatever. Removal efforts, while we do those other things, we need to remove what's present. And we are now in the decade of ocean, a decade of ocean science for sustainable development. And one of the priority areas is to remove debris that's present, right? But we need to do it in a systematic way. It's just, you know, and again, it's context specific. It's going to be context specific for every different country. So I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much. My selfish last comment would be that I take the point about, you know, the focus on the fishing industry, but I think it's also an opportunity because we've identified several needs and several gaps. And the level of interest shown in this work today, we had over 120 people at one point. There's still 90 people online. There's a great level of interest in this, as many speakers mentioned. We're about to start, we're in the midst of developing a new plastics treaty. And I think it's clear for us that this is an issue of importance to this region, and we have to keep that in mind. Some of our negotiators, I'm seeing them online. We have to keep that in mind as we go forward with the negotiations on the plastics treaty as well. So with those words, I want to thank CRFM for inviting the Secretariat to be part of this, and to thank the panel for your excellent interventions this morning, and to thank the audience, of course. So I'll now hand over to Dr. Grant, who will give the closing remarks.
Hi, good morning again, everyone. To our distinguished ladies and gentlemen. From what we have heard this morning, management of abandoned, lost, or discarded fishing gear in the Caribbean is essential to ensuring sustainable fisheries. So on behalf of the CRFM, I would like to thank all the speakers who provided their perspective on the challenges which confront the Caribbean in addressing this problem at this, our fourth webinar as part of the CRFM at 20 anniversary celebrations. I would like to thank Mr. Milton Haughton, the Executive Director for the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism Secretariat, Mr. Joel Baziuk as the Associate Director, Global Ghost Gear Initiative, and Ms. Tricia Lovell, PhD, the recent PhD graduate, I should say, for the World Maritime Institute from Antigua and Barbuda, Dr. Daana Kanhai, the lecturer at the Department of Life Sciences, University of the West Indies, St. Augustine in Trinidad and Tobago. And special thanks to our moderator, Ms. Amrikha Singh, and the program manager for CARICOM Secretariat. Now to the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, we want to thank you for your commitment to raising awareness of the problem and driving solutions for abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear globally and in the Caribbean region. We want to thank the Caribbean Fisheries Forum and the CRFM Ministerial Council for giving their resolute support to addressing the problem of ghost fishing and paving the way for the formulation and signing of the MOU between CRFM and Global Ghost Gear Initiative. This is a testament of both organizations working together, protecting our ocean and the livelihoods of our fisher folks. We could not do this without the support of the CRFM team, who have been working tirelessly and diligently to organize and promote the CRFM at 20 webinar series. To Adeli Ramos for the hard work in ensuring these webinars are a success story. We would like to thank all the attendees for being here, the 120 plus who participated in this meeting today are government representatives from the private sector, researchers, fisher folks, and others. We thank you for joining us today and participating in our discussion on actionable solutions to the growing ghost gear problems. You all have played an important part in making today's event a success, and I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. So I think with those words, we are adjourned. Thank you very much. I believe we have the other webinars in the series will be on the 11th and 12th of October.
Right. We have a couple more seminars, one dealing with the topic of sustainable use, the principle of sustainable use and what it means. We have another one dealing with sargassum, and we actually have two more. I don't remember exactly what they are, but yes, we will be sending you additional information in the coming weeks about the various seminars that we're having as a part of the 20th anniversary celebration of the CRFM. Thank you very much.
So thank you all. Please enjoy your lunch and look out for details on the upcoming webinars.
Bye, folks.
And you can go to our website, by the way. There's a lot of information on the website, so and the presentations and resource documents on the various topics that we've been discussing. Okay.